Did people really pluck out their eyelashes for beauty in the 14th century? Was a shiny, bald forehead considered peak attractiveness in the 15th century? Prepare to discover some truly wild beauty standards from the medieval period that will leave you scratching your head. Number 12. The slender, delicate hand. In the intricate tapestry of medieval aesthetic values, the hand held a surprisingly significant position, far beyond its functional purpose. It was not merely an appendage for labor or gesture. It was a canvas upon which refinement, status, and beauty were subtly yet clearly displayed. The ideal hand was conceived as slender and delicate, with long, tapered fingers that seemed almost too fragile for the rigors of everyday life. This vision was not merely about physical shape, but also about what that shape communicated about the individual. A hand that appeared untouched by toil, with soft skin and meticulously kept nails, was a potent symbol of nobility, leisure, and a life free from manual labor. It suggested an existence primarily dedicated to pursuits like reading, embroidery, or playing musical instruments, activities that were often restricted to the upper echelons of society. The desire for such hands led to a range of practices aimed at maintaining their pristine condition. Skin was kept scrupulously clean and often whitened, using washes made from ingredients like rosewater, almond oil, or even breadcrumbs mixed with milk. These preparations were intended to soften the skin, reduce redness, and promote an unblemished pallor, which was another prevailing beauty ideal of the era. The nails were meticulously trimmed and shaped, often kept short to avoid breakage, but buffed to a natural shine. Unlike some later periods that might favor elaborate nail artistry, the medieval preference leaned towards a simple, unadorned elegance that emphasized the natural beauty of the nail itself. Cuticles were carefully pushed back, and the overall impression was one of meticulous care and attention to detail, signifying the owner's status and dedication to personal grooming. Beyond simple hygiene, the slender hand was also associated with a certain kind of grace and refined movement. In an age where social etiquette and courtly behavior were highly valued, the way one gestured with their hands, held objects, or performed social rituals like greeting others spoke volumes about their upbringing and character. A hand that moved with elegance and precision was considered a reflection of an elegant and precise mind. Poets and chroniclers of the time frequently praised the beauty of such hands, weaving descriptions of their delicate forms into narratives and lyrical verses. They often likened them to lilies or swans, connecting their ethereal quality to images of purity and natural beauty. For example, accounts from noble courts sometimes describe the elegant movements of ladies' hands during dances or while engaging in conversation, highlighting how these subtle gestures contributed to their overall allure. Rings were a popular form of jewelry, worn not just for their intrinsic value, but also for how they complemented and drew attention to the slender fingers. Gemstones, intricate settings, and symbolic motifs were chosen to enhance the hand's appearance, drawing the eye to its perceived delicacy. Gloves were another essential accessory, serving multiple purposes. They protected the hands from the elements, preserved their softness, and added an extra layer of refinement to an ensemble. Elaborate gloves, often made from fine leather or silk and sometimes embroidered with gold thread or pearls, were a clear indicator of wealth and social standing. Wearing gloves even indoors during certain social occasions was not uncommon, underscoring the hand's protected and valued status. Cultivation of the slender hand was not limited to the aristocracy. While the gentry could afford more luxurious treatments and dedicated servants for their grooming, even those in more modest circumstances strove to protect their hands, understanding the cultural significance of maintaining them. However, for those engaged in manual labor, achieving and maintaining truly delicate hands was a constant challenge, making the ideal even more aspirational and a clearer marker of social division. A working hand, calloused and strong, was necessary for survival, but it was antithetical to the celebrated beauty ideal of the time. This contrast highlighted the societal hierarchy, where leisure and refinement were inextricably linked to beauty. Artistic representations from the medieval period frequently depicted figures with these characteristic slender hands. Illuminated manuscripts, paintings, and sculptures often showed saints, nobles, and biblical figures with elongated, graceful fingers, sometimes exaggerated to emphasize this aesthetic. These artistic conventions reflected and reinforced the prevailing beauty standards, presenting them as an ideal to be emulated. The way a figure held a book or offered a gesture or clasped their hands in prayer was carefully rendered to convey elegance and spiritual grace through the form of their hands. The very act of portraying such hands in art served to recognize and elevate this specific physical trait to a high aesthetic plane. The attention paid to the hands also dovetailed with broader medieval concepts of bodily purity and cleanliness. While overall hygiene practices varied widely and might baffle modern sensibilities, specific areas of the body, like the face and hands, were often given more dedicated care, particularly among the upper classes. Cleanliness and perceived purity of the hands, especially before meals or during religious rituals, were considered important. Thus, the slender, delicate hand was not just a superficial beauty standard. It was intertwined with notions of social standing, moral uprightness, and even a degree of spiritual refinement, making its cultivation a multifaceted pursuit for those who aspired to the medieval ideal of beauty. Number 11. The absence of body hair beyond face. While the medieval period often conjures images of robust natural appearances, the pursuit of beauty also extended to the meticulous removal of body hair, particularly among women, and in some contexts, men. This practice, while perhaps not universally applied with modern stringency, was nevertheless a recognized aspect of grooming and an important marker of refinement and social distinction. The ideal was often a smooth, unblemished skin surface, free from any visible hair that might be considered coarse or undesirable. This went beyond the often discussed removal of eyebrows and hairlines. It encompassed hair on the arms, legs, and other visible areas, reflecting a desire for a polished and delicate aesthetic. The methods for hair removal in the medieval era were varied and often quite ingenious, if sometimes uncomfortable or even hazardous by today's standards. Depilatories, or hair-removing creams, were concocted from a range of ingredients. Recipes found in historical texts often mention substances like quicklime, arsenic, or resin, mixed with animal fats, vinegar, or plant extracts. These mixtures were applied to the skin, left for a short period, and then scraped or washed off, ideally taking the hair with them. The effectiveness of these concoctions varied, and many would have caused irritation, burns, or other adverse reactions due to their harsh chemical components. However, the willingness to endure such discomfort underscored the societal value placed on smooth skin. Beyond chemical depilatories, more mechanical methods were also employed. Plucking, while tedious and painful for larger areas, was certainly used for fine or sparse hair. Tweezers, made from metal, often bronze or iron, were common tools for this purpose. Shaving was also a possibility, though razors of the time were not as sharp or comfortable as modern ones. They were typically made of iron or steel, often single-edged, and would require careful handling to avoid nicks and cuts. For larger areas, abrasive materials or rubbing stones might have been used to wear down or break off hair, though this too would have been an arduous and potentially irritating process. Continuous nature of hair growth meant that these practices were not one-off events, but rather ongoing routine for those committed to the ideal. The reasons behind this particular beauty standard were multifaceted. One prominent factor was the association of body hair with notions of animalism or coarseness, contrasting with the desired ideal of human refinement and delicacy. Smooth skin was seen as a marker of youth and purity, particularly for women. In an age where virginity and innocence were highly valued, a hairless body could subtly reinforce these ideals, creating an image of untouched perfection. Furthermore, for the upper classes, smooth skin was yet another indicator of leisure and a life free from outdoor labor, which might lead to sun-darkened or hairier skin. It was a subtle, yet effective way to distinguish oneself from those engaged in more arduous, exposed occupations. Literary and artistic representations from the medieval period sometimes allude to or depict this preference. While overt depictions of hair removal are rare in religious art, which focused on spiritual rather than physical perfection. Secular texts and courtly love poetry occasionally describe the beauty of smooth limbs or the desire for a delicate, unblemished skin surface. Characters in chivalric romances might be described with skin as white as milk or smooth as ivory, implying an absence of distracting hair. Though not always explicitly stated, the context of ideal beauty often implied a lack of body hair. For example, nude figures in bathhouse scenes or allegorical representations, while rare and often stylized, typically show smooth, unhaired bodies, reflecting the aesthetic preference. The practice of hair removal was not uniformly adopted across all social strata or regions. It was more prevalent among the wealthy and those aspiring to an elite appearance, who had the means and time to dedicate to such elaborate grooming routines. For the vast majority of the population, practical concerns likely outweighed aesthetic ones regarding body hair. However, for those who could afford it, achieving a hairless body was part of a broader regimen of self-care and presentation. It was part of an ensemble of features, including pale skin, a high forehead, and other specific traits that collectively defined the medieval ideal of beauty. In conclusion, the medieval preference for an absence of visible body hair stands as a testament to the era's nuanced and often surprising beauty ideals. Far from being a period of unkempt naturalism, the medieval world embraced a meticulous approach to personal grooming that in some respects echoes the depilatory practices of today. The lengths to which people went to achieve smooth skin, utilizing potent concoctions and enduring discomfort, underscore the depth of their commitment to an aesthetic that valued refinement, delicacy, and a distinct separation from what was perceived as unrefined or animalistic. This dedication to hair removal serves as a fascinating glimpse into the complex interplay of social status, purity, and aesthetic aspiration that shaped medieval beauty. Number 10. Sparkling, bright eyes. In the intricate canvas of the medieval face, the eyes were considered windows not only to the soul, but also to the very essence of a person's beauty and vitality. An ideal pair of eyes in the medieval period was not simply about color or shape. It was about their perceived clarity, brightness, and a certain captivating sparkle. Large, clear, and luminous eyes were highly prized, believed to reflect inner health, a youthful spirit, and even a degree of moral purity. This fascination with eye brilliance led to various practices aimed at enhancing their natural luminosity, some of which seem quite astonishing from a modern perspective. One of the most remarkable and historically documented methods used to achieve sparkling eyes involved the application of belladonna, also known as deadly nightshade. This plant contains atropine, a powerful alkaloid that dilates the pupils. Medieval women, and potentially men, would carefully apply small amounts of belladonna extract, often in the form of eye drops, to their eyes. The effect of this was to widen the pupils, making the eyes appear larger, darker, and more intense, thus creating the desired sparkling and captivating effect. The very name belladonna translates from Italian as beautiful lady, a testament to its long-standing use in cosmetology. However, the use of belladonna was fraught with danger. Atropine is a potent poison. Too much could cause blurred vision, hallucinations, increased heart rate, and even death. Despite these severe risks, its continued use indicates the significant value placed on achieving this particular eye aesthetic. Beyond the dramatic effects of belladonna, simpler and less hazardous methods were also employed to maintain eye health and clarity. Herbal remedies and eye washes made from various plants were common. Rosewater, known for its soothing properties, was often used to cleanse the eyes and reduce redness. Fennel, chamomile, and eyebright were other popular ingredients in concoctions believed to improve vision, reduce irritation, and impart a subtle brightness. These natural remedies, while not providing the dramatic pupil dilation of belladonna, contributed to the overall health and clear appearance of the eyes, making them seem more vibrant and attractive. Proper rest and a healthy diet were also understood to contribute to the brightness of one's eyes, reflecting the holistic view of beauty often found in medieval medical texts. The color of the eyes was also a factor in medieval beauty standards, though perhaps less emphasized than their brightness. Blue or gray eyes were often lauded in courtly literature, associated with celestial beauty and purity, particularly in Northern European traditions. However, dark eyes, often described as black as sloes or bright as coals, also held their own allure, symbolizing passion and intensity in certain contexts. Regardless of color, the primary emphasis remained on the eye's clarity and vivacity. An ideal eye was free from redness, cloudiness, or signs of fatigue, presenting an unblemished and expressive gaze. The appearance of the eyes was also intricately linked to other facial features. The trend of plucking eyebrows and eyelashes discussed elsewhere inadvertently drew more attention to the eyes themselves. Without the framing of brows and lashes, the eyes became the undisputed focal point of the face. This deliberate stripping away of other facial hair heightened the impact of bright, dilated pupils, making the gaze more direct and seemingly profound. This practice created a stark, almost ethereal quality to the face where the eyes stood out in dramatic contrast to the pale, unadorned skin around them. The significance of sparkling, bright eyes in medieval culture extended beyond mere physical attractiveness. In religious iconography, saints and divine figures were often depicted with luminous, almost otherworldly eyes, symbolizing spiritual insight and divine grace. In secular literature, particularly chivalric romances, the eyes of the beloved were frequently praised as sources of light, inspiration, and overwhelming beauty, capable of enchanting knights and inspiring heroic deeds. A lady's glance could convey love, disdain, or encouragement, making the expressiveness and clarity of her eyes paramount. Artistic representations from the period provide visual evidence of this aesthetic preference. Figures in illuminated manuscripts and paintings often have large, wide-open eyes with clearly defined irises, often rendered with a certain luminosity. While direct depiction of pupil dilation is subtle, the overall impression is one of eyes that are intensely alive and observant. The way light was sometimes painted into the eyes of portraits or religious figures further emphasized their brightness and depth, reinforcing the idea of them as a key element of beauty. Pursuit of sparkling eyes in the medieval period highlights a profound cultural appreciation for inner luminescence and outward vitality. The willingness to resort to dangerous substances like belladonna alongside more benign herbal remedies denotes the lengths to which individuals would go to achieve this captivating feature. It was a standard that combined the allure of the supernatural with a tangible desire for youthful clarity, making the eyes a focal point of medieval beauty practices and a fascinating testament to the era's unique aesthetic sensibilities. Number 9. The noble nose. Among the various features meticulously scrutinized and idealized in the medieval period, the nose held a distinct and often unspoken place. Unlike the dramatic emphasis on foreheads or eyes, the ideal nose was often characterized by its subtlety and refinement, rather than overt prominence. The noble nose, as it might be termed, was typically envisioned as straight, slender, and well-proportioned, neither too large nor too small, and certainly not crooked or excessively fleshy. It was a feature that was meant to complement the rest of the face without drawing undue attention to itself, contributing to an overall sense of aristocratic grace and harmonious balance. This ideal stemmed from classical influences that permeated medieval thought, particularly regarding facial aesthetics. Ancient Greek and Roman sculptures, which depicted straight, often aquiline noses as a mark of beauty and intellect, continued to influence European artistic and aesthetic sensibilities. A straight bridge, a delicate tip, and nostrils that were neither too wide nor too narrow were the hallmarks of this desired form. A nose that deviated significantly from this norm, such as one that was excessively hooked, upturned, or broad, might be seen as less refined or even indicative of a lower social standing, a somewhat prejudice. Unlike some other beauty standards that involved active alteration through plucking, painting, or specific cosmetic applications, the shape of the nose was largely a matter of birth. There were no surgical procedures in the medieval period to reshape the nose in the way modern plastic surgery allows. Therefore, the noble nose was often presented as an inherent quality, a fortunate gift of nature that distinguished individuals. This meant that while people might strive to enhance other features, the nose was largely accepted as it was, and its ideal form became a marker of inherent grace or good lineage. Individuals naturally endowed with such a nose were simply considered more beautiful in this particular aspect. However, despite the lack of direct modification techniques, the nose's appearance could still be subtly influenced through other means. The prevailing fashion for high-plucked foreheads and the absence of eyebrows inadvertently drew more attention to the central features of the face, including the nose. With fewer distractions around the eyes and brow, the nose's form became more prominent within the overall facial symmetry. The way a person styled their hair, particularly if it was pulled back to expose the face, also played a role in how the nose was perceived, framing it within the context of the entire facial structure. Literary descriptions from medieval romances and chronicles often praised the noses of beautiful women, though usually in conjunction with other features. A woman might be described as having a well-shaped nose or a straight nose, indicating that this feature contributed to her overall harmonious appearance. For instance, in the description of an ideal lady, a chronicler might mention her fair skin, bright eyes, and a nose that was neither too long nor too short, but perfectly proportioned. These descriptions, while sometimes brief, underscore the importance of the nose fitting pathing into the desired facial aesthetic without any jarring disproportions. Artistic representations in illuminated manuscripts, paintings, and sculptures also reflect this preference. Figures of saints, nobles, and idealized beauties consistently exhibit straight, slender noses, while artistic styles varied across regions and centuries. The general tendency was to depict noses that conformed to this classical ideal, even if sometimes stylized. These artistic conventions served to reinforce the prevailing aesthetic, presenting the noble nose as a standard of beauty to be admired and subtly aspired to, even if direct alteration was not possible. Portrayal of a harmonious facial structure, where each feature contributed to an overall sense of balance, was a key aspect of medieval portraiture. Furthermore, the noble nose was not just about physical appearance, but also carried symbolic weight. In some medieval physiognomic texts, studies that claimed to determine character from facial features, a straight nose could be associated with intelligence, honesty, and a balanced temperament. While these were not scientific theories, they were part of the cultural understanding of how external appearance might reflect internal qualities. Thus, possessing a noble nose could subtly suggest not only physical beauty, but also desirable personality traits, further elevating its status in the medieval beauty lexicon. The subtlety of the noble nose ideal makes it, perhaps, less startling than other medieval beauty standards, but its consistent presence in both literature and art reveals its quiet significance. It was a feature that contributed to an overall impression of refined elegance and aristocratic breeding, valued not for its overt statement, but for its harmonious contribution to the desired facial symmetry. In a period that valued balance and proportion in many aspects of life, the straight, slender nose stood as a quiet testament to a refined aesthetic vision. Number 8. Golden, flowing hair. Among the myriad of medieval beauty standards, hair held a position of paramount importance, particularly for women. The ideal often leaned towards long, flowing, and ideally light-colored hair, frequently described as golden, flaxen, or wheat-colored. This was not just a passing fashion. It was deeply ingrained in cultural perceptions of femininity, purity, and even social status. Long, abundant hair was seen as a sign of youth, vitality, and fertility, while its light color evoked images of innocence, ethereal beauty, and sometimes divine grace. The pursuit of golden hair led to various practices aimed at achieving or enhancing this desired shade. For women naturally blessed with lighter hair, exposure to sunlight was a common method of bleaching. Historical accounts and images suggest that women would spend hours sitting in the sun, often with their hair spread out, sometimes applying lemon juice or saffron solutions to aid the lightening process. This natural bleaching, while time-consuming, was a gentle way to achieve shimmering golden tones. The association of sun-kissed hair with beauty also linked it to a somewhat contradictory ideal of paleness. While the skin was kept pale, the hair was encouraged to take on a sunny hue. For those not naturally endowed with light hair, more elaborate and sometimes surprising methods were employed. Recipes for hair dyes and rinses are found in medieval medical and cosmetic texts. These often involved ingredients like saffron, turmeric, onion, skins, or even a mixture of alum and sulfur applied to the hair to impart a yellowish or reddish golden tint. The effectiveness varied, and some of these concoctions might have been harsh on the hair or scalp. For instance, some recipes mention the use of lye or strong alkaline solutions, which could strip hair of its natural oils and potentially damage it. Despite the risks, the desire for golden locks persisted, indicating the strong cultural preference for this hair color. The length and abundance of hair were equally significant. Long hair, often reaching the waist or even the knees, was a highly celebrated attribute. It was seen as a symbol of female beauty, an outward expression of a woman's vitality, and perhaps her marriageability. In many contexts, unmarried women wore their hair uncovered and flowing, particularly on special occasions as a display of their youthful beauty. Once married, women typically covered their hair, either entirely with veils and wimples or partially with elaborate coiffures and nets. However, even when covered, the sheer volume and length of the hair beneath were still admired and implicitly understood. The association of hair with purity and status was complex. In some religious contexts, unbound hair could be seen as a sign of wantonness, leading to the custom of married women covering their heads. Yet, in courtly love poetry and secular art, the flowing, unbound golden hair of the beloved was a recurring motif symbolizing idealized beauty and romantic allure. This apparent contradiction highlights the different spheres of medieval life: the sacred versus the secular, public versus private, and how beauty standards could adapt or be interpreted within these contexts. For instance, a noblewoman might cover her hair in church or in public, but let it flow freely within the confines of her castle, or during a private gathering where the focus was on her personal appeal. Hairstyling also played a role. While long hair was ideal, it was not always left entirely loose. Braids, often intricately woven and sometimes adorned with ribbons, pearls, or gold threads, were popular particularly for holding the substantial volume of long hair. Coils and elaborate updos, sometimes encased in decorative nets called cauls, were also common, especially for married women or those in formal settings. These styles coast the abundance of hair even while keeping it contained, suggesting both a natural richness and a cultivated artistry. Artistic representations from the medieval period, particularly in illuminated manuscripts and tapestries, frequently depict women with long, flowing golden hair. Figures like the Virgin Mary or idealized noblewomen are often shown with hair that shimmers with golden hues, sometimes almost unnaturally bright, emphasizing its beauty. These depictions reinforced the cultural ideal, making it a visual touchstone for beauty across society. Even in portraits, where accuracy was sometimes desired, there was often an emphasis on the hair's length and color, suggesting that these were highly desirable features to highlight. The symbolic weight of golden hair also extended to narratives and folklore. In many tales, a heroine's beauty is underscored by her remarkable golden locks, often signifying her noble birth, her innocence, or her destined greatness. This recurring motif in literature and oral traditions solidified golden, flowing hair as an archetypal feature of female beauty in the medieval imagination. An ideal that transcended mere appearance and became deeply embedded in the cultural understanding of what made a woman truly beautiful. The sheer dedication required to maintain or achieve this hair type, from sun exposure to various treatments, speaks volumes about its importance in the medieval aesthetic. Number 7. The high waistline and elongated torso. Medieval fashion, far from being static, evolved dramatically over the centuries. But one recurring aesthetic that influenced perceptions of beauty was the emphasis on a high waistline and the visual elongation of the torso. This sartorial standard was not about physical body modification in the way some other beauty ideals were, but rather about shaping the perceived silhouette of the body through clothing. The goal was to create a graceful, almost ethereal appearance, emphasizing slenderness, height, and a particular kind of elegant posture. In the late medieval period, particularly from the 14th century onwards, European fashion saw the rise of garments like the houppelande and later the cotehardie and gowns that prominently featured a high waist. For women, these garments were often cut to fit snugly over the upper torso, with the waistline placed significantly higher than the natural waist, sometimes just below the bust. From this elevated waistline, the fabric would often fall in voluminous flowing folds to the floor, creating a long, unbroken vertical line. This design effectively made the wearer's legs appear longer and their torso more elongated, giving an impression of stately height and a slender figure. The effect of the high waistline was not merely to create an illusion of height. It also served to emphasize the upper body. A fitted bodice above the high waist drew attention to the chest and shoulders, which were often broad and well-proportioned in the fashionable ideal. The long, flowing skirts below then created a sense of verticality and grace, making the wearer appear to glide rather than walk. The silhouette contributed to an overall impression of delicate refinement, suggesting a figure that was light and airy, almost defying gravity. For men, while the high waistline was less universally prominent than for women, particularly in later periods with the advent of shorter tunics, earlier medieval garments also played with proportions. Long flowing robes and tunics worn by noblemen could also create an elongated look, and doublets or pourpoints, especially when paired with hose, emphasized a lean physique. The overall effect for both genders was to move away from a more natural, unfitted shape towards a deliberately constructed and idealized form, where vertical lines and a sense of upward movement were paramount. The importance of posture was also amplified by these fashions. To truly embody the elegance of the high-waisted, elongated silhouette, a straight back and an upright carriage were essential. A slumped posture would break the desired vertical line and diminish the garment's intended effect. Therefore, The fashion itself encouraged a certain way of holding oneself, contributing to an overall impression of nobility and self-possession. This emphasis on posture further highlighted the long neck, which was another admired feature, creating a seamless line from the head down to the sweeping hem of the gown. Artistic representations from the late medieval period vividly illustrate this fashion trend. Figures in illuminated manuscripts, portraits, and frescoes often show women in gowns with extremely high waistlines, often cinched with a belt or sash just under the breasts. The fabric then cascades downwards, creating an incredibly long and slender lower body. The artistic exaggeration of these proportions in some depictions speaks to the strength of this aesthetic ideal. The goal was not necessarily anatomical accuracy, but the portrayal of an idealized form that conformed to contemporary notions of beauty and elegance. The significance of the high waistline and elongated torso went beyond mere aesthetics. It could also subtly communicate social status. Fabric was expensive, and voluminous skirts required a significant amount of material signaling wealth. The impracticality of such long, flowing garments for manual labor further marked the wearer as someone of leisure, reinforcing their position in society. The deliberate manipulation of the body's silhouette through fashion was a powerful tool for social display, signaling not just beauty but also privilege. This beauty standard shows how clothing was an integral part of the medieval beauty regimen, transforming the natural body into a culturally desired form. The high waistline and elongated torso created a graceful, almost majestic silhouette that was deeply admired. It was a standard that valued verticality, slenderness, and an ethereal elegance, fundamentally shaping how the medieval ideal of beauty was perceived and presented. Number 6. The rounded abdomen. This particular medieval beauty standard might be one of the most perplexing to a modern eye, accustomed to ideals of flatness and slimness. In various periods of the Middle Ages, particularly among the upper classes, a softly rounded abdomen was not only accepted but was sometimes actively considered a desirable trait for women. Far from being seen as a flaw, a subtle fullness in the stomach region could symbolize health, fertility, and even a degree of social comfort and prosperity. This was not about overt obesity, but a gentle curve that suggested well-being and the potential for childbearing. The reasons behind this preference are rooted deeply in the societal values of the time. In an era where infant mortality rates were high and food security was often uncertain, a healthy, well-nourished appearance was highly prized. A woman who carried a bit of weight, especially in her abdomen, was perceived as robust and capable of enduring childbirth and raising healthy children. Fertility was paramount, and a rounded stomach was an outward sign of a woman's reproductive potential, making her a desirable candidate for marriage and the continuation of a family line. This was a direct contrast to ideals of gauntness, which could be associated with illness, poverty, or asceticism. For the wealthy, a rounded abdomen could also be a subtle indicator of their social standing. It suggested that they had access to ample food and lived a life of leisure, free from the physical rigors and potential scarcity faced by the poorer classes. A woman who was too thin might be seen as lacking in resources or suffering from poor health, neither of which were desirable attributes. Therefore, a gentle fullness around the stomach area was a subtle marker of privilege and well-being. While there is no widespread evidence of medieval women artificially padding their stomachs to achieve this look in the same way they might have shaped other parts of their bodies, the prevalence of certain fashion styles certainly accommodated and even accentuated this shape. Gowns in some periods were designed to be voluminous around the midsection, falling loosely from the bust or high waist without tightly cinching the natural waist. This generous cut allowed for and subtly emphasized a rounded stomach rather than concealing it. Even earlier fashions, which might involve simpler tunics, allowed for a natural shape without the restrictive corsetry that would become common in later centuries. Artistic representations from the medieval period, particularly in secular portraiture and depictions of noble women, often show figures with a discernible curve in their lower abdomen. While not exaggerated to the point of caricature, these figures are rarely depicted with the flat stomachs that are idealized in many modern cultures. Instead, a gentle roundness is often present, integrated into the overall aesthetic of a healthy and prosperous woman. For instance, depictions of the Virgin Mary, though divine, often show a subtly rounded form, perhaps reflecting both spiritual abundance and a worldly ideal of fertility and motherhood. Literary descriptions also occasionally allude to this preference, describing women as well-proportioned or of goodly stature, terms that in the medieval context would not necessarily imply thinness, but rather a healthy, full figure. The celebration of a woman's physical strength and capacity for motherhood often went hand in hand with an appreciation for a robust physique, of which a rounded abdomen was a natural component. It is important to distinguish this rounded abdomen from a full-blown pregnant silhouette. While some periods did indeed celebrate pregnancy and women would continue to wear their regular clothing, the ideal of the rounded abdomen was a more general, non-pregnant state of healthy fullness. It was a body type that spoke to a woman's general well-being and her potential for childbearing rather than an active state of gestation. Although the two ideals could certainly overlap, cultural shift in what constitutes an ideal body shape over centuries is clearly demonstrated by this medieval preference. For a society that faced periodic famine, disease, and high mortality, a body that signaled health, nourishment, and reproductive capability was inherently beautiful. The rounded abdomen was a tangible sign of these qualities, embodying a practical and profound understanding of well-being that stood in stark contrast to many contemporary aesthetic values. This standard, perhaps more than any other, highlights the fundamental differences in what cultures value and why those values translate into specific physical ideals. Number 5. The long, swan-like neck. In the intricate visual language of medieval beauty, the neck played a surprisingly prominent role. A long, slender, and graceful neck, often compared to that of a swan, was considered a highly desirable attribute for women. This particular feature contributed to an overall impression of elegance, nobility, and a certain ethereal delicacy. It served to elevate the head, literally and figuratively, making the wearer appear taller, more statuesque, and inherently refined. Achieving or accentuating a long neck involved a combination of natural endowment and deliberate fashion choices. While one cannot physically lengthen the bones of the neck, clothing styles were expertly designed to create the illusion of greater length. In the late medieval period, particularly the 14th and 15th centuries, women's gowns often featured broad, shallow necklines that exposed the collarbones and the base of the neck, drawing the eye upwards. Even more avant-garde were the extremely high collars and elaborate headdresses that rose dramatically from the head, which, by creating a sense of verticality above the face, emphasized the apparent length of the neck below. The most striking technique to emphasize the neck, however, involved the manipulation of the hairline. As part of the broader medieval ideal of a high, broad forehead, women would often pluck or shave the hair from their foreheads and temples. This practice extended to the nape of the neck and sometimes even the sides of the head. By removing the hair that framed the face and neck, particularly around the ears and up to the crown, the skin of the neck was visually extended upwards. This stark removal of hair created an uninterrupted expanse of skin from the shoulders up to the headdress, giving the illusion of an incredibly long, almost impossibly slender neck. Contrast between the smooth, pale skin of the neck and the elaborate headwear further amplified this effect. Posture was also critically important. To truly embody the swan-like ideal, women were encouraged to hold their heads high with their shoulders down and back straight. This elegant posture naturally elongated the neck, and created a graceful line from the base of the spine up through the crown of the head. Such a posture was not only considered beautiful but also indicative of good breeding, poise, and social standing. It was a cultivated grace that complemented the fashion and enhanced the perceived length of the neck. Literary descriptions from the period frequently praised the long necks of beautiful women. Poets and chroniclers used vivid imagery, often comparing the neck to a tower of ivory, a pillar of alabaster, or most commonly to the graceful neck of a swan. These comparisons underscored the desired qualities: length, whiteness, and an elegant curve. For instance, a lady in a romance might be described as having a neck white as milk and long as a crane's, emphasizing both its pallor and its desired length. Artistic representations from the late medieval period provide strong visual evidence of this aesthetic. Portraits and figures in illuminated manuscripts often depict women with exaggeratedly long, slender necks. Their heads are often held high, their hair pulled back or removed, and their gowns feature necklines and headwear that accentuate this feature. These depictions were not merely artistic flourishes. They reflected and reinforced the prevailing beauty ideals, showing how artists of the time understood and conveyed feminine attractiveness. The elongation of the neck in paintings and sculptures became a recognized convention for depicting beauty. The long, swan-like neck was not just about physical appearance. It also carried symbolic meaning. It suggested a certain aloofness and untouchability, a regal bearing that set the noble woman apart. The delicate nature of such a neck also implied a certain fragility, which was also paradoxically desirable in some contexts, contrasting with the robustness expected for childbearing. This blend of elegance, height, and fragility made the long neck a powerful component of the medieval ideal of aristocratic female beauty, creating a striking and often baffling silhouette that continues to capture the imagination today. The dedication to achieving this effect through both subtle and radical means highlights the intensity of medieval aesthetic aspirations. Number 4. The small, pouty mouth. In the medieval beauty lexicon, the mouth held a fascinating position, distinct from modern ideals that often favor full, wide smiles. The preferred mouth was typically small, delicate, and often described as a rosebud mouth, with lips that were full enough to suggest health, but not overly broad or gaping. A certain pout or soft curve was admired, giving the face an expression of demureness, sweetness, and often a subtle innocence. This ideal was deeply intertwined with notions of modesty, purity, and refined feminine demeanor. The size of the mouth was a key factor. A small mouth was considered a mark of refinement and aristocratic breeding. It suggested restraint and a delicate sensibility, contrasting with the perception that a wide mouth might imply coarseness or excessive laughter. The phrase rosebud mouth aptly captures this aesthetic: compact, perfectly formed, with a hint of natural redness and a soft, inviting curve. It was a feature that conveyed a sense of controlled beauty, where emotion was subtly hinted at rather than overtly displayed. To enhance the natural color of the lips and achieve the desired rosebud effect, various cosmetic practices were employed. While medieval makeup was often less overt than in some later periods, subtle enhancements were common, especially among the upper classes. Natural pigments derived from plants or minerals were used to redden the lips. For example, madder root, cochineal, or even beeswax tinted with red ochre were common ingredients in lip salves or pomades. These would be applied to give the lips a healthy, appealing flush, drawing attention to their delicate shape without making them appear unnaturally painted. The goal was to mimic a natural, youthful flush that suggested good health and vitality. The way the mouth was held also contributed to its perceived beauty. A slightly closed, demure expression was often favored over a wide smile, particularly in formal settings. This reflected broader medieval values that prized modesty and a controlled emotional display, especially for women. A hint of a pout or a gentle curve was considered alluring, suggesting a quiet allure rather than overt expressiveness. This subtle expression contributed to the overall aura of gentle grace and refinement that was highly valued. Literary descriptions from medieval romances and poetry frequently celebrated the rosebud mouth. Authors would describe a lady's lips as red as coral, sweet as honey, or like a rose in bloom, emphasizing their delicate color, alluring shape, and often their capacity for gentle words or sweet kisses. These poetic descriptions reinforced the cultural ideal, making the small pouty mouth a recurring motif in the portrayal of female beauty. The emphasis on the sweetness and delicate nature of the lips underscored their role in conveying charm and innocence. Artistic representations from the medieval period, particularly in illuminated manuscripts and paintings of women, consistently depict figures with small, often downturned or softly curved mouths. These mouths are rarely shown in wide smiles. Instead, they convey a sense of gentle contemplation or demureness. The lips are often painted with a subtle rosy hue, highlighting their shape and reinforcing the ideal of the rosebud mouth. The artistic conventions of the time reflected this aesthetic preference, portraying women with a quiet elegance centered around their delicate facial features. The small, pouting mouth was also linked to broader concepts of feminine virtue. Controlled mouth was associated with chaste speech, modesty, and discretion. In a society where a woman's reputation was paramount, the way she carried herself, including the expression of her mouth, could subtly communicate her character. This cultural link between physical appearance and moral qualities further elevated the small, demure mouth to a beauty standard that transcended mere aesthetics. It was a feature that embodied both physical allure and perceived moral goodness, making it a cornerstone of medieval female beauty. Number 3. Absent eyebrows and eyelashes. Perhaps one of the most striking and baffling medieval beauty standards to modern sensibilities was the widespread practice of removing or significantly reducing eyebrows and eyelashes. Far from being a subtle trend, this was a prominent aesthetic choice, particularly for women of the upper classes, especially from the 14th century onwards. The ideal face was often a pale, unblemished canvas, framed by a high forehead, with the eyes standing out dramatically due to the deliberate absence of surrounding hair. The logic behind this practice was multifaceted. Firstly, it was directly linked to the prevailing fascination with a high, broad forehead. By plucking or shaving the eyebrows, the expanse of the forehead appeared even larger and smoother, creating an unbroken line from the top of the head down to the eyes. This emphasized the desired elongated facial structure and the intellectual or noble connotations associated with a prominent forehead. The removal of eyebrows literally opened up the face, drawing more attention to the eyes and the upper portion of the visage. Secondly, the removal of eyelashes further amplified the eyes themselves. Without the natural framing of lashes, the eyes appeared larger, more prominent, and almost otherworldly against the stark pallor of the skin. This effect could be quite dramatic, giving the gaze an intense, piercing quality. It was a deliberate stripping away of natural features to highlight others, creating an ethereal and somewhat stark beauty that was highly valued. The emphasis shifted entirely to the clarity and color of the iris and the expressiveness of the gaze, rather than the natural framing elements. The methods used for eyebrow and eyelash removal were straightforward, though undoubtedly painful and repetitive. Tweezers, often made of metal, were the primary tool for plucking hairs, one by one. For more extensive removal, or for those who wished to achieve a completely smooth line, small razors or even hot rags could have been used. Depilatories mixtures designed to remove hair might also have been applied, though these were often harsh and potentially irritating to the delicate skin around the eyes. The constant regrowth of hair meant that this was not a one-time procedure but a continuous grooming ritual, requiring dedication and tolerance for discomfort. Artistic representations from the late medieval period provide compelling visual evidence of this practice. Figures in illuminated manuscripts, paintings, and tapestries frequently depict women with extremely thin, highly arched, or even completely absent eyebrows. Eyelashes are also notably missing in many depictions, leaving the eyes wide and unframed. While some artistic styles might have simplified facial features, the consistent portrayal of plucked or shaved eyebrows and lashes across various forms of art strongly suggests it was a widespread and recognized beauty ideal. These depictions were not merely artistic licenses, but reflections of contemporary fashion. Literary descriptions, while not always explicitly stating the removal of hair, often describe faces that align with this aesthetic. Descriptions of women with high foreheads and bright eyes implicitly suggest a face where eyebrows and eyelashes do not obstruct or detract from these features. The overall effect was one of an almost artificial porcelain-like perfection, where the natural, sometimes unruly growth of hair was tamed or eliminated in favor of a smooth, uninterrupted surface. Cultural significance of absent eyebrows and eyelashes went beyond mere aesthetics. It was a clear marker of social status and leisure. Such meticulous grooming required time, effort, and access to tools, distinguishing the wealthy elite from those who had neither the time nor the inclination for such practices. It also conveyed a sense of control over the natural body, a mastery of one's appearance that was often associated with refinement and aristocratic breeding. The deliberate alteration of a person's natural features to conform to an ideal spoke volumes about their dedication to the prevailing beauty standards of their society. This medieval beauty standard stands as a powerful reminder of how dramatically aesthetic preferences can shift over time. What might seem unsettling or unnatural today was once a coveted sign of beauty, sophistication, and a deep commitment to an ideal. The lengths to which medieval individuals went to achieve a face devoid of eyebrows and eyelashes underscore the fascinating and often baffling nature of historical beauty practices. Number 2. Ghostly pallor. In the medieval period, a ghostly pallor, an exceedingly pale complexion, was not just admired but actively sought after as a paramount sign of beauty, particularly for women. Far from being a mark of ill health, as it might often be perceived today, a translucent, unblemished white skin tone was a powerful symbol of nobility, leisure, and purity. It suggested a life lived indoors, shielded from the sun's harsh rays, a privilege reserved for the upper classes who did not need to toil in the fields. This ideal was so deeply ingrained that women often went to extraordinary lengths to achieve and maintain it. The primary method for maintaining pallor was simply avoiding direct sunlight. Ladies of the court and noblewomen would wear wide-brimmed hats, elaborate veils, and gloves when venturing outdoors even for short periods. Their clothing was designed to cover as much skin as possible, with high necklines and long sleeves being fashionable. This deliberate protection from the sun ensured that their skin remained untouched by tanning, preserving the desired delicate whiteness. Contrast between their pale skin and perhaps their colorful gowns or dark hair was often considered striking and beautiful. Beyond protection, medieval women also employed various cosmetic concoctions to lighten their skin and enhance its paleness. Recipes from period medical and cosmetic texts mention the use of substances like lead-based paints, cerose, flour, powdered chalk, or even mixtures containing arsenic. While highly effective at whitening the skin, many of these ingredients were toxic and harmful over time, leading to skin irritation, disfigurement, and serious health problems. The use of lead, for example, could cause lead poisoning, resulting in a grayish complexion, hair loss, and neurological damage. Despite these grave risks, The societal pressure to maintain a pale complexion was so strong that such dangerous practices persisted. More benign methods also existed for skin whitening. Washes made from rosewater, milk, or egg whites were used to cleanse and supposedly lighten the skin, while also softening it. Ingredients like almond oil, beeswax, and various herbs were incorporated into creams and salves aimed at promoting a clear, unblemished complexion and reducing any redness or imperfections. The focus was on achieving a smooth, almost porcelain-like quality to the skin, free from any blemishes, freckles, or sun-induced discoloration. The cultural significance of pallor was multifaceted. Firstly, it was a clear sign of social status. Those who worked outdoors, like peasants and laborers, would naturally have sun-darkened skin. Therefore, a pale complexion unmistakably signaled that one belonged to the leisured class, untouched by manual labor. Secondly, paleness was associated with purity and innocence, particularly for women. It evoked images of spiritual virtue and a delicate, almost ethereal beauty. In a religious context, a fair complexion could also be linked to the purity of the Virgin Mary and other saints. Literary descriptions from the medieval period are replete with praise for pale skin. Heroines in chivalric romances are routinely described as having skin as white as milk, as white as alabaster, or as white as a lily. These comparisons emphasize not only the color, but also the desired smoothness and purity of the skin. The frequent repetition of these descriptives in poetry and prose marks the universal admiration for this particular aesthetic ideal. Artistic representations, particularly in illuminated manuscripts and paintings, consistently depict noble women and figures of beauty with extraordinarily pale complexions. Their skin tones are often rendered in stark white or very light hues, sometimes contrasting sharply with rosy cheeks or red lips, which were often applied separately. The artistic convention reinforced the cultural ideal, presenting a visual standard of beauty that was widely recognized and admired. Even in more realistic portraiture, there was a clear emphasis on depicting the sitter with as pale a complexion as possible, a sign of their status and beauty. The pursuit of ghostly pallor in the medieval period highlights a profound cultural understanding of beauty that stood in stark contrast to natural human responses to sunlight. It was a standard that valued artifice over natural tanning and status over ruggedness. The willingness to apply potentially toxic substances and endure restrictive practices for the sake of a pale complexion speaks volumes about the power of medieval beauty ideals and their deep connection to social hierarchy and cultural values. Number 1. The towering forehead. Prepare for a beauty standard that might truly make you do a double take. In the later Middle Ages, specifically from the 14th century onwards, the ideal female face was often characterized by an incredibly high and broad forehead. This was not merely about a naturally large forehead. It was a deliberate and often extreme manipulation of the hairline, achieved through plucking or even shaving to create an expansive, smooth expanse of skin above the eyes. This towering forehead was considered a paramount sign of beauty, intelligence, and nobility. The reasoning behind this seemingly bizarre trend was multifaceted. Firstly, a high forehead was associated with intellect and wisdom. It was believed to signify a refined mind and a thoughtful disposition, qualities highly admired in noble society. By extending the forehead upwards, individuals aimed to enhance this intellectual aura, giving their faces a serene, almost contemplative quality. Secondly, the high forehead created a distinct and highly fashionable silhouette. It elongated the face, giving it an elegant, almost ethereal appearance. This was often paired with other features like a long, slender neck and a relatively small mouth, creating an overall impression of delicate refinement and aristocratic grace. clean, unblemished expanse of the forehead became a central focal point of the face, drawing the eye upwards and emphasizing the upper portion of the visage. To achieve this towering forehead, women went to extraordinary lengths. The most common method was to pluck the hair from the hairline, sometimes several inches back, extending towards the crown of the head. This meticulous and undoubtedly painful process was performed regularly to maintain the smooth, hairless forehead. For an even more dramatic effect, some women would even shave the hairline, creating a stark, uninterrupted expanse of skin. This practice was not limited to the front of the head. Hair was often removed from the temples as well, making the forehead appear even broader. The goal was to create a perfectly round or oval face shape, framed by a high, unblemished forehead. Beyond the hair removal itself, the practice also involved specific grooming techniques. The skin of the forehead was kept scrupulously smooth and often whitened, using the same types of washes and cosmetics applied to the rest of the face, such as rosewater, milk, or even lead-based concoctions to ensure a pale, unblemished surface. Any natural blemishes or unevenness would have detracted from the desired perfection. The forehead was meant to be a canvas of pristine pallor, accentuating its size. Artistic representations from the late medieval period provide the most compelling evidence of this beauty standard. Portraits of noble women from the 14th and 15th centuries frequently depict them with extremely high, almost bald foreheads. The hair that remained was often tightly pulled back or covered by elaborate headdresses like the hinnon or crespinet, which further emphasized the forehead by creating a striking vertical line above the face. These headdresses, often conical or heart-shaped, drew the eye upwards, making the forehead appear even taller and more prominent. The depictions in illuminated manuscripts and paintings show a clear artistic convention that reflected and reinforced this unique aesthetic. Literary descriptions of beautiful women from the period often praise their broad or high foreheads, directly reflecting the prevailing fashion. A lady might be admired for her forehead clear and bright, or broad and smooth as polished ivory, emphasizing both its size and its unblemished quality. These descriptions were not mere poetic license but direct indicators of what was considered beautiful and desirable at the time. Towering forehead was also a clear sign of social status. Such meticulous grooming required time, patience, and access to tools, distinguishing the leisured elite from the working classes. It was an aesthetic that clearly communicated one's position in society, touting a dedication to refinement and an adherence to the most avant-garde beauty trends of the day. The sheer commitment required to maintain such a hairline speaks volumes about the societal value placed on this specific feature. This medieval beauty standard is perhaps one of the most vivid examples of how human ideals of beauty can defy natural appearances and shift dramatically across cultures and historical periods. The deliberate creation of a towering, smooth forehead through hair removal stands as a fascinating and truly baffling testament to the lengths people would go to conform to the dominant aesthetic of their time.